I want to take this moment to say good morning to all the beautiful children watching this morning and all the parents out there trying to make life work. And, you know, we're going to give you some tips as to how to deal with your children, how to love, talk to your children, how to discipline your children, and how not to. We have some suggestions. And yesterday, Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, addressed the House of Representatives about ending corporal punishment in all public schools across the island. Professor of Child Health and Child Development at UWI, Maureen Sams Vaughan, is here to share her views. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning.
Good to see you again.
Yes, yes.
We were together at the UNICEF Violence Against Children.
Right. The launch of all the new
the
information.
Reports.
Yeah.
What are we seeing in Jamaica with violence against children, especially when we're talking about corporal punishment?
Well, we're seeing the complete range of violence. Corporal punishment is probably considered one of the milder forms of punishment, but it is still punishment and it still has consequences. We don't have a very good record in terms of our use of corporal punishment. We are fourth in the world for beating children 2 to 4 years. Those are little children. Those are children who you can just lift and move away when they're doing something that you don't want them to do. So we have that.
I want to highlight your tips as you say that. Move them away.
You just move them away. You lift them up. It's very simple to manage children between 2 and 4 years who are, you know, behaving, doing things that you don't want them to do. And usually these children are really just exploring. That's usually what they're doing, which is how their brain develops and how their brain works. And oftentimes it's because they're exploring in areas that we don't want them to explore. So many times the environment is not as safe for them. So parents of children who live in very tiny, cramped areas, sometimes it's much more difficult for them to have a large, safe area for children to play. So those children sometimes get slapped and hit because they're going after things. And really, what parents are trying to do is protect the children, you know. They really are trying to do that, but that's not the appropriate way to protect them.
Is that because that's how we were raised? It's embedded in our culture, beating children.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's go through with stick, broom, whatever your shoes.
Pinching. A lot of pinching takes place of very young children.
Okay. What are the effect? What is the effect on a child? How does it affect the child is what I'm trying to ask. Because a lot of Jamaicans will tell us, if we're going to change the culture, we have to look at how people think. Jamaicans will tell you, me get enough beating and nothing no do me. What happens to a child when we beat them, slap them, pinch them?
Let's just look at what typically happens. You hit a 2 or 3 year old. What do? They hit you back. Okay, and that's because they are just manifesting the fact that when you administer violence, you teach children about violence. They typically just hit you back. And that's the perfect example of how violence begets violence. Let's take it a little further. When the violence is more severe than that, especially when children are very young, their brain circuits get altered. So, I mean, we have pictures of the brain that look very different between children who have been exposed to violence and children who have not. And what happens is that those brain circuits get activated very easily later on in life, so that whenever there's a problem that the child faces, the first instinct is to hit out. So these kids get into trouble when they go to school.
So it's a part of our culture now, and we're doing it in the home. This is what happens to the brain circuit. We heard what the Prime Minister said about corporal punishment in the schools. So it's happening in the community, it's happening in the home. What is going on in the schools in Jamaica, and what do we need to do about corporal punishment in schools?
Well, it's happening both at home and at school, as you say. But in fact, the research actually shows that there's more of it at home than there is in school. And, you know, probably because of the amount of time children spend, all the weekends and stuff, and parents being frustrated sometimes. Corporal punishment takes place a lot in school. And sadly, when we interview children, a lot of children get beaten because they're not learning. Yes, absolutely.
Not learning?
Not learning. I have seen so many children who have undiagnosed learning difficulties, undiagnosed autism, very high functioning kids with autism, undiagnosed attention deficit disorder, children who have behavior problems because of something that's happening in their home life, and they're not sure how to express it, so they act out at school. It's so much better for us to try to find out what's going on with children. You know, if they're not learning so well, let's see how we can find out what's going on. Let's get them assessed. If they're having behavior challenges, let's have them go to the child guidance clinics. Let's see how we can find out what's going on. You know, schools need to be a safe haven for children. It needs to be a place where children come to learn, to express themselves, and, you know, to just learn to cooperate and learn boundaries, because that's what school does too. Many children don't have boundaries at home, and school is where they learn boundaries. So school it's important for discipline to occur in schools. Discipline must occur in schools.
But you're saying discipline does not mean the paddle?
Discipline does not mean physical punishment.
Okay. And when we say corporal punishment, for those who just turned on the television, that is any form of
Physical means of disciplining a child.
Okay. Pinch, slap, paddle, hit with book, hit with ruler.
That's right.
Okay.
What we don't talk a lot about is emotional abuse, because some children who don't get physically hurt get a lot of emotional abuse. They're told, you know, that they're stupid and they're dunce and they're black, and, you know, they get told
Black and ugly is
black and
usually what
ugly,
they
yes,
say.
and they get told lots of things. So that emotional abuse also takes place, but our focus today is on corporal punishment. And
Okay.
I want to congratulate the Prime Minister. Major important step, because we find that children who are exposed to corporal punishment, children who are exposed to lots of corporal punishment, they're also the children who are exposed to community violence. They're also the children who are exposed to homicide in their community. So corporal punishment is just one aspect of the myriad episodes of violence that they experience.
You mentioned in an article Friday gone in a newspaper that Europeans are not beating their children in this way. Other societies are not beating their children in this way. But we do see, you know, CNN had published that suicide had doubled since 2007 with children in America, in Europe as well. We see high suicide rates with children, and they're not necessarily beating their children. I'm trying to work out what are the other issues that leads them to have these kind of suicide issues if they're not beating them, and is that something that we can avoid and look out for?
Well, suicide is a completely separate issue, really. It's normally born out of depression, which is, you know, a mental health problem. And we're not picking up on the cues as well early enough in terms of trying to, you know, identify children who have mental health issues. Some of the behavior issues that children have are manifestations of mental health problems that we're just not addressing well enough. But the reason why I mentioned Europe is that when we look at the countries in the world with the highest levels of corporal punishment, they're almost all in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So, you know, just a particular geographical group are beating children. And when we look at general levels of violence, these are also the countries that have overwhelmingly high levels of violence as well.
Interesting. We need to carry on the conversation, and I'm sure we're going to have to train the teachers and the principals on the other methods of disciplining the children if the law is passed that corporal punishment should be banned. I mentioned at the top in public schools, but I'm sure the Prime Minister is also mentioning all schools.
All schools.
It means all schools,
right.
Not just public schools, but prep schools, private institutions
That's
as
great.
well. Thank you. We'll continue to hear your story. Thanks for enlightening us and giving us another option to protect our children and end corporal punishment in our country. Professor of Child Health and Child Development at UWI, Maureen Sandswan. After the break, we learn about the Adopt a Clinic initiative. Stay tuned.